Welcome to Podtification, the show where three pastors sit around displaying their sharp wit and their occasionally sharp theology. We hope you enjoy. Now let's get on to the show. All right, welcome to Podtification. I believe we are on episode 7. So we have made, now this one I think probably qualifies as the true half-baker's dozen, right? Because I think last week somebody made a comment about
half-baked.
This one might be half-baked. Well, I was told right before the show that I had to open the show, not because I did a good job last week, but because apparently this might be my last one.
Yeah, you're on the chopping block. That's for sure.
I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. I know that in my head, I'm going on sabbatical at the end of this week for 6 weeks, and I figured after 6 weeks I'd be able to come back. But
well, I think the plan is to have some guests, guests while you're gone, and I think the concern is
that I might get ousted.
Right, it just might be better with you gone, and so
there's going to be somebody that shows up that's either
any of the guests.
I was going to say it's not just you though. I think we all three of us might want to be concerned.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? Like, what if somebody comes on here and they just happen to be like that much better than all three of us? And
so what could happen? The scenario could be we have a guest next week, the first guest, then the next week, the second. The next week, the third, and then the questions after that week are, can the three previous guests just do the podcast?
I have a question for one of the other guests.
So
we need to copyright the name Podtification right now.
Exactly.
Before it gets taken out from under us.
That's right.
Some enterprising individuals from the church could stage a Podtification coup.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, let's make this good.
Jesse thought of that, right? Was that your
the name Podtification?
Yeah, that was Jesse.
That's Jesse.
All right.
Nice. Yeah. I think you should write that on a piece of paper, mail it to yourself, and don't open it. I think they call that a poor man's copyright. So, with the date, you have to date it.
Do I have to put a stamp on it too?
If you want it to go through the mail, yes.
Can I email it to myself so I can text it? I can just text it to myself.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, just a narcissistic comment, but this is true. Greatest Loser was my idea.
The Greatest Loser?
The show, not
the Biggest Loser.
Biggest Loser.
Oh, we need to unpack that for a moment.
The Biggest Loser.
The Greatest Loser. Definitely my idea. I've been looking at it for as long as I can remember.
No,
It's not a show, man. It's a way of life.
All right, well, I'm not even going to let you know about it.
I've heard this story before.
It's a true story.
Yeah. You go ahead and tell it, Brent.
So when Survivor began, me and a friend, Brian Campbell, both came up with the idea of, what would be a great reality show? A weight loss show. So we wrote our ideas down and sent them to Mark Burnett. And literally 10 years later, I'm watching TV and I see this new TV show coming on. My idea. He never wrote me back. He waited 10 years to use my idea. So,
right, you should have mailed it to yourself.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yep. So let's go ahead and get started. I think we've already kind of technically started, but usually we start with that question: what's big in your life this week? So Brent, how about you get us started? What is
the Biggest Loser will begin with what's big.
That's right.
In his life. I'm back to reality. My COVID test was negative, and so I got to go to church, got to go to work, some normalcy. So that's big in my life. And so,
preached a great sermon.
Well, thank you.
It was a good sermon. It was a great way to come back from vacation.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thanks.
So just to be clear, though, the big thing in your life right now is normalcy.
Yes.
W- ha-
Yes.
I have goosebumps, man. That was exciting.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Well,
You have,
it was. I just like being able to go places. That was I felt trapped, and so yeah.
I was going to say you have a little bit of an extra blessing though, because you do have an essential job. So
Yeah.
your normalcy has been existing all along for the most
Right.
part. The
Right.
rest of us have experienced what you just experienced for 1 week. So,
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Can you, I didn't want to ask you this while you were technically in quarantine, just because I didn't want to kind of put you on blast there. But like, can you describe to me how much were you actually like were you literally like, we're shutting the doors in our house and we're not going out of our house for a week?
Yeah, I
Or
was.
like, just beyond, like, how much were you actually that caged animal that you were talking about? Or
I went out one time to go get the boys from the airport because they flew in a day after, and I didn't want to make somebody else go pick them up from the airport because they might get exposed. But with the exception of that, I did my groceries delivered. I did everything.
wow, good for you.
Well, I mean, I was in a county / parish, as they call them in Louisiana, where there were 250 cases and there's only 1,400 people in the county. So ratio speaking, there was I didn't go hang out with people, but I went to the store and the gas stations and that sort of thing. So I felt sort of an extra sense of responsibility. I mean, if I was somewhere like, Montana, and it was me and the mountains, maybe I wouldn't have been as diligent because I wouldn't have feared like I got exposed in any way. But I did have a tiny fear that I had been exposed so that I was strict, and so
Good job. Well done, Brent. Thank you for taking care of all the rest of us.
Montana is just mountains in Spanish, isn't it?
Maybe. I don't speak Spanish.
I mean, because that's a really unoriginal name for a state.
it's
Well,
like
Vermont is just Green Mountains in French.
right. What is UVM again?
The University of the Green Mountains.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's in Latin or whatever.
That's in Latin. Yeah.
Yeah, which is super pretentious.
Well, it's a university.
You heard it here, folks.
from the campus minister.
Did you know up until this is way off the subject, but Eric Hernandez, who's a professor at UVM, sent me the list of presidents for UVM, and until a couple of generations ago, all the presidents at UVM were pastors. Actually.
Yeah, like for the first 100 years or
Yeah.
so, they were all Congregationalist ministers.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So pretentious ministers, but
pretentious ministers.
Yeah. Aren't we all?
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, but that's every one of us. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. I'll go next, just because last week I made Jesse go first. So this week I'm gonna make him go last. I have the power. I might as well enjoy it.
You're in charge.
I'm in charge for a few moments longer, and then I'll hand it over to you. So big in my life this week, I was sharing this actually with Brent just a few minutes before we got started, but I've spent the last 2 days upstairs. We have an apartment upstairs that you learned was recently vacated by Lauren and Lacey. We miss you guys. And we've been up there cleaning and getting everything ready for the new tenants and doing some painting, and I shampooed the carpets today in 95-degree weather. There's no electricity up there, there's no ACs up there, there's no fans, there's nothing. It was just like,
you're really selling the place, man.
I was really
good thing you already got it rented.
Yeah, seriously. Well,
it is miserable up there.
It's horrible. Miserable.
I'm glad I don't live.
They can bring their own stuff and hook up electricity, but I haven't done that. I'm stingy. But it was like a sweat box, and I mean, seriously, dripping sweat while doing all of this kind of stuff. But I was saying, like, goodness, I slept amazingly last night. It was so nice, to like, there's something gratifying about hard work, the kind of work that like makes you sweat.
Totally.
You know, it really does. Brent was saying it cleans out your pores. I think it cleans out more than your pores. You know, like I slept so well last night.
Your
I'm looking
ears?
forward to it again. Yeah, cleaned out my ears.
Fingernails? Where are you going with
I
this?
was going more metaphysical.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah,
Intangibles. Yeah.
intangibles. That's right. But it was just a good time. I mean, it was hard and it wasn't always the most enjoyable, but at the end of the day, the satisfaction level was tremendous. And so now it's kind of like go up there and just take a peek at it before people move in and just see everything in its pristine condition. And you're just like, wow, we did a great job. This is awesome. So
Yeah.
very satisfying. So that's what's big in my life this week, is just that satisfaction of a good day's work.
Yeah. Well, you've done your one for the year now.
My one thing. Yeah, my
one good day's work for the year.
That's
no,
right
but
before sabbatical.
you're 100% right though about like physical exertion and like getting hot and like tired and sweaty and stuff, and then just feeling like the just the sense of accomplishment and like the tiredness that comes from that I feel like uniquely comes from that.
Yes.
And it does feel, it feels good. Like both your body feels good, but then you also like, feeling tired reminds you of why you're tired. And that kind of just feeds back into that sense of accomplishment. Right.
Right. Yes.
And so I totally agree with you. Yeah.
I think of the book of Ecclesiastes, which has shown up several times in this podcast. But
Ecclesiastes and Aaron, those are kind of like the running
Aaron,
themes.
yeah, we'll talk about Aaron a little later.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Somehow we'll work him in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Ecclesiastes, like Solomon talks about all of these different things that he's pursued in his life. And at the end of the day, the only thing that he's found that has any real value or purpose is doing a good day's work.
Carpet cleaning.
Of carpet cleaning.
A
good day's work. Like
I gotta read that book again though.
But kind of his culmination is doing a good day's hard work for the glory of God. That's basically what it kind of boils down to. At least that's always been my takeaway. And there's a lot of other good nuggets in there, but that's kind of that underlying, like, this is where he ends up. Brent, you look like you have something to say to that.
Well, I guess I haven't read Ecclesiastes in a while, because I was thinking my take on Ecclesiastes, I don't remember what he talked about work. It seems like he had more of a negative reaction to some aspects. It seems like Solomon had a negative reaction to the futileness of, love, money, work, everything. But I'm trying to remember what he said exactly. Do you remember? I'm just trying.
I don't remember exactly, but let me see. I'll see if I can look it up and pay attention to Jesse at the same time.
Okay, all right.
I think it's fear the Lord and keep his commandments. I think that's what's left for man.
Yeah, that's how it ends. Yeah, exactly.
That is how it ends. But I'm pretty sure there's a statement in there about doing good work. But Jesse,
maybe we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that with our guest next week, and we'll roast Sean in our podcast if necessary.
That sounds good. That sounds good. All right, Jesse, what was your big thing this week?
Yeah, I'm just going to go way out on a limb here, and I know this will be a controversial take, but I've decided that I really like water. I mean, I am on a huge water kick right now. I decided I like drinking it. I like looking at it. I like swimming in it. I'm all in with this water thing. Like, and if you haven't experienced it yet, I highly recommend you do. So I know maybe a controversial statement here with you guys, but 100% I'm all in with water and I'm loving it. So this weekend, if you live in Vermont, it's been hot here. It has been hot and hot and hot.
It's been super hot.
Relentlessly hot. And I read
for those from Louisiana watching, it's been like a normal Louisiana day in Vermont. But go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, hot.
All
right. And actually, I read a news article this morning that said it's qualified as a heat wave, which sounds super intense. But yeah, like 90 degrees at night, upper 90s, and at night it's gotten down to like the 80s. Which is not really that cool either. So it's been hot. And And this weekend we went as a family to a couple like different like waterfalls and streams and stuff that like in Vermont, which was just so fun, because like you go and you'd hear the water come in, and like as you're walking through this canyon, like the temperature just starts to like drop, and it just starts to drop, and you get to this waterfall. It's just all of a sudden like 20 degrees, feels like 20 degrees cooler there. It's just so enjoyable and everything. And so I've really been loving that. And I'm really captivating you guys as you're both looking at your phones. So I'm going to just cut off. So thank you for asking.
No, I was listening. You get to the cannon, it dropped 20 degrees. And
so next week, if you're interested in being a part of Podtification, if you would care to actually listen to the co-hosts when they're talking, I am looking for 2 co-hosts. That would be great.
I was listening. I told you I was going to look for that passage and listen at the same time. And but anyway, continue.
Okay.
I'll put my phone down. I will not read the Bible right now.
Hey,
Jesse.
let's actually change. No, let's change. I'm done.
Jesse. I was looking at my phone because I was about to say how biblical you were, because I was thinking there's a study that recently came out that talked about depression and anxiety going down from just being around a body of water. And, I was thinking of the psalmist, he leads us beside still waters. So I was going to affirm you in your love for water, but I'm sorry you took offense to us looking at our phones.
I think we should move on. It's a pastoral juke to say I was looking at the Bible, so you can't get angry with me. It reminds me of a time I was working with teenagers, and this kid is sitting here, and I'm like, "Hey man, you got to get off your phone." He's like, "I was playing my Bible." Yeah. So we all know what you guys are doing. But let's move on, because actually one of the questions I have to ask is about cell phones.
Okay.
The 3 of us text all the time. We text one another. We text as a group. Probably most of the people listening to this have experienced texting at some level or another, messaging, whatever, on Facebook or text via phone. I have a question for you guys. Actually, genuinely curious about this. I have realized, just kind of through looking at my own texts as compared to most other people's texts, like in the thread, in the conversation, I almost always text with grammar, right? And so I'll include like punctuation, capitals, like double space, like there'll be semicolons in there sometimes, like 100%. And it's not like an intention, it's just what I do, right? It's like how I write, it's how I text. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at more and more of the texts that I'm seeing from other people are not that way. Here's my question. Is it better, more polite to be grammatically accurate in your texting, or like grammatically brief, like at like as few symbols as possible?
Yeah. I think that's actually changed culturally. Even in emails, with professional emails, I no longer care about grammar or punctuation. I just want to get it to the gist of it. It depends. If it's like a physician I work with a lot and they know me well, that sort of thing, I'm like, can you review this? Put the name, and I just a quick question, that is not even grammatically correct, kind of thing. If I've never talked to them via email before, I try to do grammar and punctuation, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I'm kind of like, let's just get to the bottom line kind of thing. Is the way communication is nowadays. And so I think punctuation and grammar has gone to the wayside of, let's just get it down to quick communication. So that's so I kind of go there. So.
Yeah, I think I agree that kind of the trend is towards brevity. That's kind of what's king, especially in texting. I think email, it depends on the circumstance, but I think in texting, brevity is usually what the drive is. And it's funny because I remember a couple of years ago, I read this article about how using punctuation, in particular the period at the end of a sentence in a text, to young people communicates kind of a harshness, which I was like, okay, that seems weird, and I wasn't sure that I believed it. And I asked some of the students that I had at the time, and some of them were like, what? I don't know where that came from. But there were some that were like, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that definitely communicates this kind of a harshness. So like leaving off a period means you're just more accessible, you're more approachable, which is really strange, you know.
Well, I do dot, dot,
Exclamation
dot.
points are awesome. Exclamation points are great,
Yeah.
you know, but
Yeah.
yeah, like the period is, that's a texting no-no, which is funny. But I'll still sometimes do it depending on kind of what I'm communicating, but I've compromised significantly on those kinds of rules in texting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think probably I feel like this is a place where I'm probably a dinosaur, and I admit it. Like including not, I mean, like all grammar. I'll put quotes in. I'm not like 100%. I would do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely, like you said, like that's kind of phasing out of style and expectation. But I also think it's not just that. I think it also kind of comes across weird. That people are, you know, why are you doing that? You know, I'm not going to change, but I think it's interesting that it's like, that it is kind of like culture is kind of shifting in this, yeah, kind of relaxed approach to grammar in that kind of setting, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
The next thing it kind of made me think of in a text, and I know one of the three of us is going to think this is directed at them, but it truly is not. Is it polite to call out typos, or is it rude?
Oh, it depends on what the typo is. I think sometimes it is absolutely hilarious, and I love to point out people typos if the typo is like something that's really funny. But other times I wouldn't necessarily refrain from it because I would think it's rude. I would think it just derails the conversation.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't even care about my typos. I know what you're saying. I'm like, I don't even care anymore. I just I just voice text, and as long as I get the gist of the message, I don't even try to correct anything anymore.
I can't tell you how many voice texts I have gotten from you, Brent, where you're just talking and it speaks or spells out the words that you're saying, and sometimes you'll even at the end you'll be like, thanks, Brent, except it says print.
Yeah.
So
I'll
get print at the end of the email.
Yeah, I've given up caring. I just don't even care.
I mean, I think texts from you, Brent, are always, there's always like an element of deciphering, right?
Exactly.
Where you're like, I'm pretty sure this is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Almost inevitably, where you read it and you're like, yeah, I think I know where we're going with this. But I've actually used that in a sermon illustration before, where I just read one of your texts that you sent to me, and it was just so nonsensical. It's just like words that did not fit it all together. Because I think it had been what you did, like a speech to text thing, and of course it missed them by just a little bit, and then it just didn't make any sense at all. Which actually is kind of fun. Like it's kind of a fun. It's kind of funny. Now, I think when I didn't know you were doing speak to text, I was a little bit concerned. But now that I kind of get it a little bit, it makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about that. Is it better to just gloss over it? Like, because a lot of times people, if they care about that, they'll send a text and they see that they do a typo, and I've done this before, and then they like retype that word correctly.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I do that.
You know, like
I do that every once in a while. Yeah, if it's
and it's funny because it's like, I know that's what like I can interpret that, you know, I know that's what you meant, or like who's that for? Yeah, you know, I always thought that's interesting. I've done it too, by the way.
Yeah. Well, why do you do it? Because I have my own reasons.
Probably to show that I'm like paying attention. I think that's probably what it is. but I don't know if I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast before. A little bit of a rabbit trail, but my phone, like I started to try to do like the swipe to text thing where you like drag your finger across, like
Yep.
Instead of typing, you like swipe around.
Mm-hmm.
And when I tried to do that, like my typos went up like 1,000%. And I stopped doing it because it was like just so many typos in every text. But when I was doing that, I'd text something and send and then look at it and it was like completely the wrong words. And then I'd have to like send like corrections, you know? But I think, yeah, probably Sean, mostly just, I want people to know that I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why.
That is a way better reason than mine. I just don't want to look stupid. I want people to know I know how to spell that word.
I know days isn't spelled with a Z, okay? I know that. I'm not dumb.
Yep, exactly. So that's
okay.
Mine is more vanity.
Vanity,
than anything,
yeah,
so.
yeah.
All
Well,
right.
maybe you should just like put a caveat, like I just do speech to text, and so give me a break. Yeah, I've long thought about this, that if you get a text in all caps, that means somebody's like yelling, right? Like that,
right? Yes, yeah.
I guess I would like to see, like, I think out of all the other emotions that should be conveyed, I think like sarcasm, we need like a font or like a text case for that.
That's a good idea, actually.
You know what I mean? Like, I think like I'm happy to have one that's like yelling, because I can either be yelling for like celebratory, or I could be yelling angry. But like it's really hard to communicate like oh, I'm just joking around, or kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, like without an emoji, which I think you have to use like some kind of emoji for that. But I don't know. To me, I think that would be really useful.
I feel like probably the best way to do that, and this is just spitballing, and I don't even think I know this isn't a possibility, but if you could do like the reverse italics, right? The lean back italics.
Is that a thing?
It should be a thing. I know it's not a thing, but like that would be, because italics usually leans forwards.
I really like whatever image that creates when you say lean back italics.
Yeah.
I had like a good band name. I don't know. Like I just like the image there, lean back. Because italics are so intense, and like if you think about lean, I like that.
I don't know. That's the first thought that pops into my head for sarcasm.
No, I just think that's a big need, that you could have some type of font for sarcasm. I think that would be good, because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to write that on a letter, and I'm going to send it to
Mark Burnett.
Bill Gates.
Mark Burnett, yeah. And in 10 years, we'll have it. All right. Shall we move on? Have we talked enough about cell phones?
Sure.
So we have been getting some like listener questions and stuff like that. We love talking about that, just hearing what's on you all's minds as you hear us talk and stuff like that. And so we're always grateful for those questions. And if you have more things that you'd like us to talk about, whether meaningful or kind of really meaningless, please send them on, and we'll discuss them, and probably discuss them more than we should, as we've been doing with texting. But just, if you have a chance to send us your questions or whatever. We have something here from Doug, which is a pretty interesting question about scripture. Doug says, here would be a fun one to tackle, he says. So it better be fun. Doug is telling you guys it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be fun. What about biblical dichotomies, the things that seem to be opposites that are the tension of Christian life? Examples right away, he says, are the command to be in the world but not of the world, or Jesus walking in grace and in truth. So Doug says, answer this question and have fun doing it. You guys have any thoughts about that?
Oh, goodness.
You answer it, I'll have fun.
Yeah. I because I don't know how I can do both right now. That's such a broad topic and a broad theme within Scripture. I mean, I think you do see frequently Jesus does kind of like to use these tensions throughout Scripture, and partly I've wondered if the reason why he does that is because as humans we tend to like to think in black and white. We don't live in black and white, we live in gray, right? We're constantly making compromises and all those kinds of things, but we love knowing where the borders are. We love to know, like, I can go up this far before I've committed X atrocity or whatever it happens to be. And so we like this idea of black and white. And so Jesus takes that kind of idea of, like, here's the hard left and here's the hard right, and I'm going to say that you've got to have a little bit of both. Or not even a little bit of both, right? And that somehow these things have to exist in this kind of unique tension. And I think part of the reason why that is one, because it takes the control out of our hands. Because if we know where the boundaries are, we can begin to manipulate things to fit our own best interests. But to somehow exist with both boundaries as they are, at the same time, I think brings us to a place where we have to rely more on God, who exists in that tension himself. How on earth can we begin to get our mind around the idea that God is one and three, right?
Yeah, great point.
So I think that's part of why those things exist, because it means that we have to rely more on God, who is a tension. Was that fun?
I enjoyed that.
Oh, good.
Doug, did you enjoy that? Leave a review. Let us know. Brent, do you have any thoughts to add on to that? I think that's a great point, Sean, especially bringing up this nature of the Trinity, which I think is a really, really good tension there in Scripture.
When I think of tension, the one that always comes to my mind is the fact that God, the Scriptures, God's all is adamant that God's in control. God's sovereign. God's in control of things. But at the same time, humans, God holds responsible. So they have some type of freedom themselves. And there's a famous book, Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God by J.I. Packer. And he calls this tension an antinomy, which basically means something that seemingly is contradictory, but it's not really. And he uses the example of a light. Light can be either a wave or a particle, and we don't understand that. I mean, even science still doesn't understand that. And there's physics still building theories around that. But I think of some truths in Scripture are like that. We can't fully understand it. The other analogy that I was taught as a young Christian, which is helpful to kind of accept the dichotomies of some things. For example, if we use that one tension of God being sovereign and people have, people are still responsible for their actions. If you look at down a railroad track, and if you're just standing on some railroad tracks, you look down and it looks like they actually come together is the further you look, but they're actually just running parallel to one another. And I think that's the way some truths really are, as far as in the metaphysical world, if you will. So anyway, not too fun of an answer, but that's my
you mean some truths appear one way from our perspective,
right?
But given a broader perspective, you're able to see them more clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really, really good point.
Yeah.
I think that fits well with the grace truth one that he brings up, right? That both of those exist at the same time. And even though from our perspective, sometimes they feel like they kind of run into each other, they're not, right?
Yeah.
I think I remember, and maybe you guys can contribute this, but I think I remember reading kind of that in a lot of ways we've inherited a lot of our logical thinking about existence, about the ways that we come to conclusions. A lot of that's from kind of Greek philosophy and thinking, kind of logical progression, A leading B leading to C. And we kind of in culture today, we like that, that progression of thought and the way that one thing means another thing.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I remember reading this, and I'm pretty sure it was the Hebrew way of thinking actually found a lot of truth in like conflict and things that were in tension, things that were unresolved, and that they actually honored that way of thinking, things that were impossible to answer, or were illogical, circular. And they actually found a lot of truth and kind of venerated those issues. And I think there's something for us to kind of celebrate there. I feel like a lot of times when we find these kind of tensions or dichotomies where we feel like we have to choose one or the other, another way of thinking is to say, look at that dichotomy and embrace that tension, embrace that fact that you don't understand it. I think there's a lot of room for that in life, because that's actually the way we live. That's actually like how we navigate life all the time. Tension, I think, is a good word for it. Mm-hmm. This idea, I think it's James, right? Consider it joy when you are persecuted.
Right.
Like, we're completely counterintuitive, completely counter the way you would naturally behave, but it's part of the cycle that moves us forward. Okay, I'm getting persecuted, I'm going to try to be joyful in that, and it's counterintuitive and it doesn't make sense, and there's tension in that. I think that moves us forward, not maybe in the way that we understand here, but moves us forward in eternity. And I think there's something to be embraced there in that tension that if we try to just make things really cut and dry in our lives, we miss. So live with that kind of dissonance. I think that's a good thing. And we're forced to do it with the Trinity, like you brought up, Sean. I mean, yeah, as Christians, we're forced to live in that. We're forced to live in this thing where it's like, I kind of get this idea, God being in community with himself. I like that, but I can't really explain it without committing some sort of heresy, Right. And live with that. And that's good. And live in that notion that you can't explain it. And I think there's something biblical, but also just profoundly helpful in allowing that to be the case in your mind.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing can draw you in too, right? Mm-hmm. It helps you go deeper, because it's this desire for understanding. When you have a question, you want an answer to that question. And so you start this pathway where you're going deeper and deeper and deeper in search of an answer for that question. Some questions don't really have answers, or at least nothing that we're going to be satisfied with on this earth, but that draws us closer to the Father. Some people, that's going to push them away, right? And so that's its own unique kind of tension. But for me, at least, it feels like when you try and put two like poles of magnets together, and you're just kind of like, oh, I love that. It is such a satisfying tension, like the feel of that when you push them together and they push back on you, and it doesn't feel like there's anything there, but that there is something there. For me, that's satisfying. It's like, it's engaging.
Look, that was fun. We got around to it being fun.
It was fun. Thank you, Doug.
Brought it back to magnets. Magnets are fun.
Magnets are always
100%. Fun. Thank you, Doug. Great question. I hope we sufficiently answered that, but also didn't answer it, so that you feel that tension and then that you can grow from that, Doug.
No, actually, I would say I could have answered it, but I wanted to leave some tension. So I didn't.
Well, you oftentimes leave tension everywhere you go, Brent. I have always said that about you. Yeah. All right. So again, Doug, thank you for the question. Appreciate that. And if you're listening to this, we encourage you, go ahead and send in, questions. You can post them in the comments or whatever. If you have stuff, both biblically, non-biblically, that you'd like us to discuss, we love hearing from you guys. And I think it's just so great. I mean, I know I personally find it so, I'm just going to take a moment of personal privilege here. I got a text from somebody last week who just said, I was listening to this podcast and the conversation about taking Brent's car out of the parking garage actually made me laugh out loud where I was listening to it. I just thought, oh, that's so cool. Like to think of somebody listening to us and enjoying it and getting like a moment of pleasure out of that. I'm so grateful for that. So thank you guys when you do listen and sending us in that stuff. That it's just so gratifying, and we're really thankful for you listening and participating in this discussion with us. So
I'll agree to that. I'll agree.
Amen
Thank
to
you.
that.
So we're going to move on. We have a discussion, kind of an article. It's a short article to discuss here. I don't know if it's as much an article as it is kind of like a little devotional, written by J.D. Greer, who's. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just when I read it, I just saw JD and I didn't see his last name, so I was wondering.
Oh yeah. He's kind of like Cher. Or Oprah, you know, he's at that level of celebrity. You know,
one name level.
JD, yeah. If you know him, you know, Brent, and it's a little bit embarrassing you don't. JD Greer, who is he still the president of the Southern Baptist Convention?
Still the president, yeah.
Yeah. Also serves as a pastor, and he wrote this article. It's entitled "Don't Look." It's not an article. I shouldn't call it that. It's like more of a devotional. "Don't Look for Contentment Like You Used to," is the title here of his devotional. And I thought I'd read a couple sentences from this, ask you guys a couple questions based on some of the things that he writes, and see, you know, if you guys had some thoughts about it. But I'll just read a couple lines here. I'm skipping through a little bit of this to just kind of bring up the salient points. But as always, encourage you to read this in its entirety.
And it'll be posted.
Yeah. Before you came to Christ, he writes, your life aspirations arose from a wrong way of looking at the world. What the Apostle Peter calls the desires of your former ignorance. I'm sorry, I didn't include quotes there. It's like I'm texting you. You thought, that's out of 1 Peter 1:14. You thought, for instance, that romance was the key, for example. But at some point, you realized it wasn't quite as fulfilling as you hoped. So you move on, thinking that making lots of money would make you happy. Then perhaps you noticed that the people with the most money didn't seem to be the happiest either. So you thought you'd find that is contentment, by being the best. But that's a fool's errand too. Just look at Michael Jordan, the guy who was the best basketball player there ever was. This is JD, or just Jay to his friends, have been watching this documentary, and as inspiring as Michael Jordan's story is, it's also clear that achieving everything didn't lead him to happiness, but to emptiness and an unsettledness. You assumed that life with you in charge would make you happy, but something woke you up to the fact that even that just wasn't true. So speaking of Ecclesiastes, Pastor Greer here is he's working through these different things, ways that people maybe traditionally or typically, understandably, have looked for contentment in life. And he kind of goes through some four examples here. I actually kind of wanted to hear from you guys, kind of from a pastoral perspective. As pastors, we oftentimes just kind of walk alongside people in life. And that's it's an honor for us. It's something we get to do, which is just, it's beautiful and something I think the three of us love. But I'm actually curious, from a pastoral perspective, what are some of the things you would say are the most common, like, worldly success that people pursue, expecting that to like provide fulfillment, contentment in their lives? What are some things that you just kind of see as being some of the biggest things people pursue?
Well, working with college students as much as I do, the two that stick out to me, which I think probably are just variances of what is true for everybody. Romance is definitely one. He brings that up in there. Romance is a big thing. Like, so many people are looking for their identity in their romantic partner. And they're looking for some sense of satisfaction or purpose there, right? And then the other side of that, if they're not like dating around constantly trying to find that one person, they're pouring everything into their academic pursuits, right? Into some kind of career goals. It's that career driven mentality that I'm going to define my identity by what it is I do, like by my accomplishments. And so chasing accomplishments. And the thing with that is you always see it's like they've done one thing and then they do another thing and then they do another thing, and they always, it almost begins to feel like they have to one up their previous accomplishment, or they see somebody else who's done more and they have to be able to do at least that much or better, right? And so it becomes this kind of comparative analysis. But you do see that there seems to be this lack of satisfaction that starts out. And sometimes you're able to step back and you see, especially for people who are accomplishment driven, you're like, wow, look at the things that they've done, right? And we laud that, we praise those kinds of things as a society. But having known some of those kinds of students, they're never satisfied.
Get to that, your second point in a moment, but just to recall your first point there with relationships.
Yes.
I think that one's huge. I don't want to go too far away from kind of just what you were saying. But I think that that's not limited to single people, right? Looking for identity in romance. That can be looking for romance at all, or looking for identity in the romance that you already have, the relationship you already have, and asking that to be something it's not meant to be.
Right.
And I think it starts kind of unhealthy, is kind of what you're saying there, where just the idea of finding somebody and being so desperate for that, which I think the three of us probably get, like I remember those days for sure. And so it's not so much like kind of pointing a finger and saying they need to pull themselves together, but just that notion of like, I need to find somebody, and that once I do, then I'll be okay.
Right. Yeah.
Which of course is just not, of course it's not going to work out. Unfortunately, it ends up hurting two people, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, it puts way too much pressure on that relationship.
Yeah. So, but then to kind of just talk a little bit about your second point, this idea of finding identity in academia, I think that's a really interesting point, Sean, especially because and you actually said this, and I'll just kind of reiterate what you said, but I think it's a great point. It's common in just kind of society to say, don't be defined by your relationship. You have to be your own person. But when it comes to academia, we basically just play right into that. If somebody exceeds in study, we celebrate it, right? We say, man, you are killing it at that. Keep it up, right? And again, that's not necessarily the wrong thing to say,
right?
But again, it's like, it does kind of feed into this, like, you better do better. You better live up to the standards you've set already. And if you don't, what are you even doing? That's a great point, Sean.
It's a challenging thing for sure, to come against that as a campus minister, because the generally accepted mentality is, a student is going to college so that they can do well, so that they can succeed, so they can set themselves up. But we're sitting down with students, and this might be tough for some parents to hear, parents of college students, but we sit down with students and we want to encourage them in their faith walk, right? We want them to meet Jesus if they've never met him, or if they already know him, to grow in that walk so that they're building an eternal kingdom, not a temporal kingdom, not an earthly kingdom. So they're building God's eternal kingdom. And that might mean that we sacrifice things that are by and large, from a worldly perspective, good and valuable. And that's a hard conversation to have, because sometimes it's like, you know what? Doesn't matter if you get an A on that exam. Like that might not be the most important thing you're going to do right now. It's like, I know you've got something coming up, but don't you think it might be better for you to be in church on Sunday instead of studying, or something along those lines? And those are hard conversations.
There's a reason that I love what you're saying. There's a reason Jesus calls it treasures on earth, right? He doesn't say don't build up garbage on earth, right? He's saying don't build up treasures, and that's how we see it, right?
Right.
getting a good grade. That is a treasure, right? That is like valuable. And I think, 100%, we have to understand that those things are treasures, that they are valuable, and that we can absolutely kind of get carried away with their value. That's great. Brent, what about question for you? What are some of the common successes that you just kind of have seen people pursue over the years? Does anything come to your mind?
Well, I find, in having experienced myself, that there's always a sense of discontentness about money. It's like, I don't, there's actually studies that say, if you ask anybody, it doesn't really matter if they're making 40,000, 20,000, 60,000, 80,000, even up to 100,000. Typically they say, if I was making about 25% more, then I would be content. I'd be right where I needed to be financially. And I've experienced that. I make 25% more money than I did 20 years ago, but I still think if I just had like 25%
more,
I think I'd be at a better place. It's just a sense of discontent. So finances, I think, is one thing. And then I think the other thing is just in all the things that you want. Marketing is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You can't watch one commercial almost without exception that's not trying to build discontent in you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of the pandemic and what people have learned that they can live without, and actually they actually like living without it. I think that will be an interesting side effect of the pandemic. So
that's a good one. Both of those are good points. I was the first, just talking about money made me think of, I remember reading this a while ago, but Rockefeller was interviewed one time. Rockefeller was like crazy rich. I think he even bailed out the US government at one point, like solo, he bailed out, like he had huge amounts of money. And one time a reporter asked him how much money is enough, and his response was just a little more.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody had everything, he was probably the guy, But to your second point, I've been working upstairs on the apartment, I've had the radio going, and there's this commercial Spotify rather, and this commercial keeps popping up, and it's this ad for Samsung's new phone, I don't know what the new phone is, so obviously the ad's working great. But
you knew it was a Samsung.
You knew it was
I knew it was a Samsung.
Exactly.
That's true. Yeah. I guess the ad is working, but they're kind of saying, it's like they're really selling being one of the first people to get this phone, like really selling the kind of be the first one to get this phone, be the first of your friends to have this 8K video, so then you can also be the first person to post your unboxing video of your brand new kicks, in 8K. None of your other friends are going to be able to do that, and it's breeding discontentment. It's like the phone you have currently, not good enough, right? Your other friends already have that. You're not like them. You're just, you want to be first, and then at the end they're like, it feels good to be first.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've never experienced it, but I've heard it does.
I'm with you, man.
I remember when I got my my phone at the dealer, like whatever, the Verizon store, whatever, and the guy selling it to me, and he wanted to sell like the protection plan or whatever. And he said, well, you need to buy this because this thing is not, this phone is not a luxury. It's like utility, right? It's a necessity. Like you have to have this. And can you imagine if something broke on it, you'd have to buy a whole new one. And I was just thinking, I was like, man, I almost just went with it because I almost just thought, well, of course I have to have this, like the phone is not, I'm not buying something that I could live without. Like I have to have this thing, and it's just worked into your mind where you're just like, of course I have to do this, I have to. And the way that this kind of stuff just wheels into there, and like back to your point, Brent, about like what we could do without, man, that's a tough one. So the one, I think you guys covered a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about. I think like probably issues not only that we've seen in other people's lives, and Brent, you alluded to this, but we've also seen just kind of in our own lives as husbands, as men, like things that you deal with too, but you see other people kind of going down that road. Here, the one that I was thinking about when I read this was family. And I think actually this is pretty huge and actually kind of an acceptable idol in kind of American Christianity. So consider this. I think that we have made families like an idol, and that you get your identity from that, which is great. Like obviously family's biblical, obviously family's good, right? And obviously you want to be a responsible member of your family. But I was thinking about this. I had to look it up. Jesus says, Luke 14:25, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, his own life, he can't be my disciple. Tough scripture to read, but I think it's such a necessity for us in kind of culture today, and a culture that kind of venerates the nuclear family, and how you care for each other and you find your identity there, and you're moving forward as a family and stuff like that. And Jesus says, well, scripture says family's good and you care for your family, but understand that compared to your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with your family has to be secondary. And I think that's a difficult pill for me personally to swallow, but I think for kind of contemporary Christianity, that's a tough one, because family is everything.
I think that's a good point. It actually makes me think of the whole ancestry DNA model, and ancestry.com and all that kind of stuff, and they're really pushing this idea like who you are is rooted in who your family is,
where you come
right?
from,
Like where you come from, and what your ancestry is, and all those different kinds of things, and I think that ties into that same kind of idea. It's about family. So it's a good thought, but it's a good thing. It's not in and of itself a bad thing, but
of
it
course,
can become an idol. So
well, it's just the question, I think, just to remind myself, like, what do you look for contentment in, right? And if I'm trying to find contentment in anything other than Jesus, I'm looking in the wrong place. Family, of course, being like an honorable thing and something that we, of course, affirm completely. But you need to make sure that your contentment, that your source of hope is Jesus. And 100%, of course, on the record, pro water, pro family. So we keep it score.
Good job, Jesse.
Yeah,
good job.
I just wanted to make sure that that's out there. So that's my platform.
We're going to keep that. We'll write that down, and we'll post it up in the church.
I'll make t-shirts. I don't even care who
Make
knows
t-shirts.
it.
There you go.
Pro water, pro family. Okay, shall we move on, guys?
Sure.
Okay, I'll continue reading this article here. Peter, referencing this scripture that I read from Peter at the beginning of this article, desires of your former ignorance, 1 Peter 1:14. Peter is recognizing how easy it is to fall back into those old ways of living. You sense some unhappiness or some discontentment, and you slip into thinking you just need more money, or you slip into thinking a different living situation, or you slip into thinking I need to get vengeance on somebody. If you're in Christ, you know that doesn't work. So don't go back there. Those old desires come out of ignorance. My question to you guys, I agree with him, of course, but my question for you guys is, why do we go back to those solutions? I mean, even as Christians who have heard this over and over again, those old ways of looking for contentment, money, relationships / sex, success, all those things don't lead to contentment. Why do, and I'll say we, because we all have those kind of things. Why do we go back to those solutions? It seems like as created people, we should be ingrained to search after God. But so often we get sucked into looking elsewhere. And so I'm curious, why do you guys think that happens?
I think there is comfort in familiarity. Even if the familiar thing is bad, right? Like it's partly why people who are in abusive relationships go back, because it's at least familiar. It's predictable, and it's not good, but it's predictable. And
Interesting.
I think we sometimes allow the fear of the unknown to stall us, to freeze us where we are. Yeah, comfort and familiarity.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. Brandon, did you have a, well, I'll share my thought if you give you a moment. I also think I agree with you, Sean. I hadn't really considered that, but I agree with you. I think there's another element also. I don't know if maybe one of you guys shared this story with me, or if this is something I read somewhere about a study, experiment rather, that somebody had done on individuals, where they had this room with like a green panel or something on it, just something that had a very clear color, and people go into this room, and everybody but one person is kind of in on this thing, and everybody's walking around saying, look at that red panel, look at that red thing, look at that, it's red, and just in conversation, like, look at that, why is that red thing there? And this person, like if you read the study, they were at first kind of like, well, that's weird, isn't that green, but they didn't say anything. And at the end, they were asked, hey, in that room there was a panel, what color it was? And they said it was red. Like they went with the crowd rather than their own observations. 9 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think of the way that Christians, we live in this world, not of this world, but we live in this world. And I'm not trying to set up like it's all the world's fault, but we are immersed in a culture that does, just by definition, offer something other than Jesus, and present it as a necessity, present it as a solution. And of course it's going to do that. I mean, by definition, it's not really an accusation. It's just as kind of part of the definition of not being a Jesus follower. If we're surrounded by that all the time, and we don't surround ourselves by other voices that are calling you back into relationship with Jesus, you're going to end up saying, well, I think that maybe the square is red, right? I think that maybe I should look to this. So I think there's also an element of the voices we let kind of influence our thought patterns and the way that we look for contentment.
There are a lot of applications in that.
Yeah. Did anything, Brent, come to your mind to add? Or
I would just sort of combining both of your thoughts. I think generally speaking, we all suffer from the idol of our own personal comfort, and being a Christian, by definition, means living a non-self-centered and a future-centered, eternity-centered life. And so most of the times we revert back to a fleshly answer to contentment, because it's now-centered and me-centered, and it gives us comfort. And so much of Christianity, and I wish I could say I was an expert in succeeding in this, but so much of Christianity is about decisions that are not self-centered and future-centered, eternity-centered. And so it's just, and we are, we want immediate gratification, and so to me, there's just so much of Christianity that's so counter this world, and counter now-centered, and counter me-centered, and countered our own comfort. And I think it's worth it in the end. I think a lot of things in the end are work that I was just doing premarital counseling with some folks last night, and we were talking about Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, and he says, talking about the promise of marriage and the freedom in marriage. The freedom in marriage, he says, only comes once we keep a promise. We keep our promise to grow and stay together, love one another, but that's going to cause some discomfort. But we really experience freedom on the other end when we're no longer a slave to our circumstances or our feelings at the moment because we're committed, kind of thing. And I think that's sort of a metaphor for Christianity too, that we only experience freedom once we've gone through the discomfort and the discipline required to live that out. So I would, yeah. So.
Well
and
said.
that's kind of both, to me, that kind of not perfectly, but puts both of your thoughts together, So, yeah, perfectly is a little bit of a.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why we spoke.
I am the biggest.
I'll let you go first.
I am the biggest loser, but so.
All right. Well, mental note. We're gonna let Brent answer the next question first. So
perfectly.
Perfectly. We'll just let you answer.
Okay. All right.
But totally. And I think I would just say what you've said, it kind of draws back from Doug's question there about living with kind of that not yet fulfilled tension, and just saying like, well, that's my life right now. Already saved, not yet. You know what I mean? Not yet in heaven. So I think that's a really great. I love that kind of callback there. That's really good.
Well, you said the verse, which was a good insight. I don't know if that's original to you, but you said Jesus didn't say, store up for yourself treasure in heaven. Don't store up for yourself treasure here. So there is treasure here.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, store up for yourself treasures in heaven. That means some type of sacrifice here, usually.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too.
Yeah.
All right. So this last little part of this devotional, he says, as an obedient child of God, you don't have to go back to your old way of ignorance. You don't have to believe the lie that you need more money or a different spouse or a better circumstance to feel content. And so I don't know if this is as much of a question, maybe, but what I wrote there is that, this means there will be unanswered questions or unresolved problems in various areas of our lives. There will be not enough money, right? There will be not enough success in my career. There will be not enough recognition. There will be not enough power. We're supposed to be okay with that. That is a sacrifice that we are called to make, I think. And I think we have to understand that choosing to be content with Jesus means we're choosing to be discontented everywhere else. I think that's a really, really tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of Paul. Paul said, I have had little and I have had much, but I've learned to be content in every circumstance. And it's I've always liked that. Oftentimes I've focused on the learned portion. I was like, Paul didn't start that way. He learned it, right? He developed it. But after thinking about it tonight in this context, it actually what's sticking out more than the learned portion is this kind of detachment of contentedness from circumstance.
Yeah, right. 100%. That's a great point. Yeah. The contentment it's just there, right?
Yeah.
Whatever circumstance you go through, if your contentment is in Jesus, it's as present as Jesus is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't, I think, the other side of that coin that we really do need to just acknowledge as we approach circumstances now is that you will be discontented in these other areas, and you should expect that and be okay with it. Right?
Be content with it.
Be content with it.
Be content with your discontent.
With your discontent. Once again, basically, if you just want a summary of this week's podcast, just read Ecclesiastes,
Right.
and you'll pretty much have it. I
Yep.
do feel, just honestly, guys, we're at the end here, and we literally have not made any kind of reference or illustration based on our friend Aaron Cowan. And so, Aaron, I'm sorry. We typically try to work you into a podcast at least once a week. I don't think you listen to the podcast.
I can fit him in here. I can fit him in because some of Aaron's favorite chords to play are diminished minor chords, which are chords that are structured around lack of resolution.
Yeah.
So he's all about tension.
That is so biblical, man. No wonder he's a worship leader. That is incredible. Wow.
All right, there you go, Aaron.
There you go,
I don't
Aaron.
even know if you listen to this thing.
Yeah.
So.
I think we should just slowly start talking trash about Aaron and see how long it takes him to listen to our podcast.
That's a good idea.
Great. All right. Well, thank you guys, as always, for that discussion. And I don't know about you guys, but I hope that you feel sufficiently discontented right now, because I feel like that's my duty to you as your brother, is to create feelings of discomfort.
You're an expert at that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yeah. No, I feel like that's one of my spiritual gifts, is to make people uncomfortable.
That's pretty much most conversations.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
Yep.
All right. Well,
All right.
Any final words you want to share with the Podtificators, Brent?
No, I was just thinking, the only thought I had that I didn't share is...
Well, we're out of time. Thank you for...
No, I was just thinking maybe it's someone who wasn't a believer listening. I was thinking there is something about knowing Christ and knowing, even though we don't always, and we go back to our old ways, we get glimpses of it, that there is something, there is a way of living, of just being content because we have Christ and Him alone. And I was just thinking, if there was someone that listens that's not a believer, I think we would all say in unison, there is somebody that can give you contentness that can't be taken away.
Amen.
I think that's well put. In fact, believers, Christians, are the only people who truly have contentment, would be kind of my argument, right? It's not a question of like we're the ones struggling with all this discontentment. It's that we actually have, I believe, and I've experienced, and I think you guys have too, and I've seen other people experience, we actually have the possibility for true contentment beyond circumstance, right?
Well said. Yeah, we have the person who provides it. That's right. Yeah.
All right, Sean. So we'll bid you farewell for the next several weeks.
Yes.
Or months or years, whatever.
Would you like to just, because we won't see you back on the podcast for a while. Do you want to offer any projected what's big in your life observations based on the next several weeks? So what's going to be big in your life next week?
Oh, goodness. We've got new tenants moving in next week. I presume that will probably be big in my life next week. Yeah.
All right. What's going to be big in your life in 4 weeks?
In 4 weeks. What's the date in 4 weeks? I suppose it's the end
I think
of July,
he's baiting you with a sabbatical question. And I think
I'm hoping for radical life change, like Mohawk.
Oh,
good one.
I thought you were wanting a spiritual answer. And
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
Like, what's going to be big in your life? This tattoo I got across my chest. It's huge.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one. I'll have to keep that in mind. In 4 weeks, end of June, end of July. Yeah, I don't know. I'll win the lottery.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
you will not be content.
No.
I'll tell you that right now.
Worth a try.
Worth a shot. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you once again for listening. Episode 7 in the books. Awesome, guys. I mean, this podcast doesn't look a day over 8 episodes long. So well done.
Wonderful. That's right where we want to be.
All right.
All right. See you later, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.